I recently revealed God had been telling me to go to Norway after BSSM, and someone asked how I hear God's voice. So it got me thinking, how do I express that? So this is just a little practice run for me on how I would express what I experience. There are many ways that we hear God's voice, and I've experienced hearing Him in several ways. But first of all, I think it's important to be able to distinguish between God's voice from our own voice and from the enemy. So before diving into the languages and becoming aware of God speaking in those ways, it's important to dive into the Bible and get to know God's character and how His words sound in your head and your heart when you're reading. So if you know the scriptures well, you know the character of God. God's voice will never contradict the Bible because the Bible is God's voice. This is going to be the foundation of how you learn to hear God through the languages He uses to speak to us about specifics. The next thing I'd like to mention is that we are designed for relationship with God. Relationships involve communication, and we use all of our being to talk and listen to one another. Some people are better at listening with their ears, and some people are better at listening to body language, but all of us use multiple ways to communicate and listen. So we have 5 main senses that we perceive the world through. We've got sight, hearing, touch, smell, and taste. All of these are known to be used by God for speaking to us. And I'll give you a few examples I've experienced over the years. I've seen metaphorical images that weren't there with my naked eye. When I shared what I thought God was saying through the metaphorical image in English to the person that was highlighted to me, it turned out to be accurate for them. For touch, I felt movement, wind, and temperature change that wasn't caused by anything natural, some of which was felt by other people around me and some wasn't, but it was inside buildings or somewhere where there is no wind. And there's also physical sensations you'll feel in your body. It could be pain, electricity, heat, cold, hairs standing up on end. It's a very common discernment language, but can be used prophetically as well. So for example, whenever Africa comes up in conversation and your feet start tingling with electricity, God may be telling you to go to Africa. But if your hands are tingling, it might be to serve Africa, and that could be in Africa or not. So it's a case of asking God what He means. Because feet could be metaphorical for go and hands metaphorical for doing something for someone. The discernment language is if you get a sudden pain in your pinky, there might be someone nearby you that needs healing in their pinky. And I've smelt as well, both pleasant fragrances that had spiritual meaning for the kingdom, as well as the smell of demons, which definitely weren't pleasant. Then there's this still small voice. This one comes in a few ways. It could be a thought that is too out of the blue and random to be your own thought, or a gut feeling like intuition. It could also be a thought that you know you're not smart enough to have, or you're not loving enough to have. And some people experience sudden change of emotions when they get into a new place or around a person. This one can be confusing as it feels like your own emotion. The most obvious way to know if it's yours or not is to notice how you feel before getting out of bed, or the difference before and after entering a room. Although this one is confusing for the listener, it's also a powerful gift when we use it for personal relationship with God. You can ask to feel God's love for you, or you can ask Him for how He's feeling towards another person, and can be used to encourage people. It's usually considered a discernment language, but it's very powerful in prophetic pastoral care. How I mainly heard God about going to Norway is coincidence and repetition. There were things said and coincidences that were too numerous and unlikely. It could not be coincidence. Just Be careful with this one that it's not just confirmation bias, because you will always see things that you want to see. Another one is glory. So the Old Testament word translated into glory means a weight or the significance of God. So when I heard the word Norway in conversation or on a show or in a message, the weight or significance of God hung on the word. It's similar to what Pentecostals and charismatics call highlighting. Something just jumps out at you and you struggle to forget about it. But to me, glory is slightly more than this, with the weight of God's emphasis on it, or a mild version of the fear of the Lord. Dreams. So dreams are obvious. When I get a dream, I try and write it down. I ask God what he means. I don't remember ever being told, that wasn't me, you just had pizza last night. But it's possible. You should always be open to it just being a flesh dream. With all these languages, it's important to remember it's God who knows the meaning that he had for it when he told you. Your interpretation can be wrong, and I can tell you, I got my vision of COVID so wrong. It's pretty much the opposite of a fatal virus that shut down the world. So learning to hear God's voice needs humility as well as grows humility in you. I love the process because it draws me closer to God. That's another thing. If what you're hearing from God results in you not needing him or not getting closer to him, then I would have big questions about what you're hearing. If you're going to be sharing what you hear, there's a lot of practice on how to communicate what he said in love. Gathering an accountability team around you who will actually tell you the truth and not be yes men or even overcritical. You need the freedom to make mistakes in order to learn and grow. You also need safeguards so that you don't hurt people beyond what an apology can resolve. Be quick to accept that you could be wrong, but be bold enough to share what you believe you've heard. Know who's safe and who to share with, and who will be stupid with your word. There's some people in my life I won't share a word with because they've already told me God doesn't speak, the canon is closed. And there's also other people who, if I share a word with them, they'll sell everything they have and move to India before going through the process of judging a word. Both of those types of people are not safe people to share words with, but you're also not responsible for their response to the word. So if you find out somebody's done something silly, it's not your problem. So obey God, but be wise. If your interpretation doesn't rely on God, then you may be relying on your own understanding. There are dictionaries of dream interpretations that contain what things mean in dreams. It says things like vehicles mean your ministry, 5 means grace, and things like that. I don't know of any biblical foundation for most of it, and if you rely on your dictionary, then you don't really need God to interpret what God has shown you. He's always wanting to draw you closer to him, and you turning to a book every time he speaks doesn't really equal a relationship. Imagine doing that with your spouse. So just listen and ask him questions. This isn't a comprehensive list. Your languages will change as God draws you closer, because learning each language requires us to come out of our understanding and listen to him and not our previous language. So that's a little of what I experience when I hear God. There's a bit more when I sit down to intentionally listen to him with questions in my hand. It involves journaling and imagining him in front of me and surrendering my imagination to his hand. So I hope this helps get you closer to God, because to be honest, what's more important than that?